We're excited to welcome Amy Thompson from Compare the Market, and here she explores the ever-growing industry-wide decline of the Scrum Master role, and the reasons behind this tragic shift and what can be done to revive this role. In this session, Amy aims to demystify the true purpose of the Scrum Master and what traits are really needed to enable Scrum Masters to guide teams towards high performance. So Amy started her career in humble yet essential Scrum Mastery back in 2012, and since gained experience of working with Agile practices from the bottom up, and having worked in finance, retail, medical, and leisure sectors, her understanding of how different organizations work are essential in being able to know how to help drive to thrive. So Amy, with that, I welcome you to share with us your insights and knowledge and enlighten us. Let's welcome Amy with a round of applause.
Thank you, Mohammed. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear, Amy.
Fabulous. Okay, so let me share my screen then. And let's get started. Okay, everyone can see my presentation, I hope. Excuse me. So yeah, it's lovely to be here at Agile Northampton. I've never actually spoken here before. I didn't even know about you guys until Tom James mentioned it to me a couple of months ago, and I promised him that I would do a talk here. So here I am. So you've got Tom James to thank for this.
Thank you for agreeing, Amy.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. I'm happy to be here. Okay, so I'm sort of watching you guys on one screen and looking at my presentation on another screen. So I'm going to see if I can get as many of you in as possible now that I've moved my screen over. Okay, great. Right then, so let's get started. Just check my buttons now. Okay, so a little bit about me then. Oh, I'm going to start my timer off as well so I can see how much time I've got left. A little bit about me then. So as Mohammed said, you know, I started out as a Scrum Master back in 2012 for an organisation called, what was then called Orange Digital. And it is now called EE. So it was Orange, the phone company, who got bought out by EE. And I was there during that transition. So it was a really long time ago as their sort of only Scrum Master, really. And it's where I actually got my email of scrum.mum from, because I was the only girl in a team of boys, which I'm sure many of the ladies on this call will understand, working in tech, being the only female. And one of the guys said to me one day, "You're like our Scrum mum, aren't you?" And I was like, "Oh, I like that. I'll be a Scrum mum." So now if anybody needs me, I'm amy.thompson@scrum.mum.com. Right, anyway, so yeah, I started out obviously Scrum Master at Orange and have worked my way up sort of from the bottom up, really, to sort of more leadership level now and helping with organisational transformations. In my spare time, I like to hang out in the Lake District, which is where I am right now. And I also love hanging out with my dog, Margot, who was 3 a couple of weeks ago. She's a little cotton noodle. She's just asleep behind me at the moment, which hopefully she'll stay asleep because she's very loud when she barks. So yeah, she's a cotton d'Itulier cross toy poodle. And she's very, very sweet indeed. So yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun over the next few days. I also like to play guitar occasionally and do a little bit of singing as well, a bit of open mic here and there. So yeah, and I love my horses as well. I don't have any horses anymore, but yeah, I love riding horses. So that's a little bit more about me. Okay, so a little disclaimer then, just to be clear, I'm not representing any organisation tonight. I'm speaking as a contractor as opposed to any organisation that I may have worked for recently or in the past. I'm just completely talking at the moment from my own experiences over the last 20 years. So not necessarily discussing any organisation in particular, unless I have mentioned that organisation. Yeah, okay. So why am I here? Why have I decided to do this talk? Well, I mean, I don't feel that the Scrum Master role has been in a strong position ever. I did a talk actually back in, I think it was 2017, so 8 years ago, called Velocity, the Golden Snitch of Scrum. And I was even talking about the confusion of the Scrum Master role back then and how Scrum isn't working in organizations all that time ago. So this has been a very slow erosion process, I feel, and that sort of degradation and devaluation of the Scrum Master role, I don't think is a new thing. And I just wanted to sort of talk about what I feel the reasons are for that degradation, devaluation and erosion and dilution of this role, based on my own experiences in various organizations. And it's worth noting that I've worked in all different kinds of verticals, from pharma to finance and banking, leisure industry, retail, and they all make the same mistakes when it comes to Agile in general. So it's I think it's an industry-wide problem that we have across Agile in general, but we're focusing in particular on the Scrum Master role today. So a little bit from like a little history lesson right now, because I don't think many people kind of know about like a little bit of the background of Scrum and the sort of influences that kind of went into the Agile manifesto back in the Snowbird ski resort in Utah. And there's a couple of people who is still, very influential today, obviously, because the takeaways that they provided at that meeting. And there were 17 really strong influencers at that meeting who were thought leaders of the time. And there's a couple here that I've kind of picked out just to give some context to how, it's not just Scrum, but the Scrum Master role came about as well. So we've got these three big names in Mike Cohn, Ken Schwaber, and Jeff Sutherland, who have gone on to create the Scrum Alliance. From Mike Cohn, and Ken Schwaber was also part of the Scrum Alliance initially, and then moved into Scrum.org in 2009. And also Jeff Sutherland went on to create Scrum.inc as well. And then we have Martin Fowler, who created the concept of refactoring. Now, these are influencers, they're not necessarily the inventors of it, people who contributed mostly to these processes. And then we have Mike Beadle, who actually came up with the name Agile. Sadly, he was actually killed in a robbery in March 2018. And there was quite a lot of publication around that at the time, around how the industry had lost a really important influencer. So whenever you hear the word Agile, think of Mike Beadle. The user story was conceived by Alistair Cockburn, and Kent Beck came up with what was pre-Scrum, which is Agile, Extreme Programming, or XP as people might know, and also apparently test-driven development as well, or TDD, which I'm sure you've all heard of as well. So since these times back at Snowbird, when the Agile Manifesto was created, and all these great thinkers came together to discuss, the best way ways of working, it's sort of worth thinking, okay, well, they came up with Scrum, and Scrum had, this revolutionary kind of approach to software development. Obviously back in the day, we had the waterfall, and we had, projects that went on for 2-3 years, releases would happen annually, etc. So Scrum came up with all these answers to all these problems that organizations were having around risk, because obviously long projects are massively risky because there's a lot of investment with no return, because there's no releases for months or years even. They came up with, how to empower teams, and challenge the status quo when it came to hierarchy and structure in general, and also get, working software out, as opposed to just concentrating on the thinking about doing something and documenting doing something and actually doing something. So it seemed to have this amazing kind of take on software delivery that organizations were like, this is great, But if we think about that for a minute, they said it was great, but then we have to think about the readiness of those organizations, because in theory, it is great. Scrum is great when it's done properly. But when you start looking at the organizations and how they operate culturally, organizations are rarely ready to do Scrum properly, or any Agile methodology properly. And even though teams are the most versed in Agile approaches, because they're the ones doing, the software development lifecycle, and they're the ones who are building code and testing code and deploying code. And obviously, when Agile is adopted by an organization, it starts in tech. So it's the teams themselves that are usually the most, I suppose, experienced in this. But as you work your way up the leadership scale, the experience level is less and less and less, because the chances of those people having actually worked in a team or in the trenches, as it's referred to, is minimum. So they don't understand how it works in teams and the problems that teams experience when trying to do Scrum properly. And because they don't know how to change the organization to become accommodating to Scrum and its rules, which results in Scrum rules being broken left, right, and center. So readiness for Scrum, I think, is a major contributing factor to how the Scrum Master role has changed into something that it's not, or even become close to extinction. When an organization isn't ready for such fundamental, drastic change that Scrum introduces, because it's a very disruptive methodology, and should be, all Agile methodologies are disruptive because they challenge the status quo, right? But a lot of organizations aren't ready for that. And so what they do is they try and change Scrum to fit them instead of the organization changing to fit Scrum. And that's where the problems began, I think, because if you read the Scrum Guide, especially the Scrum Alliance Scrum Guide, it's actually, if you adopt it in its true form, actually doing that needs major, organizational change, major organizational transformation. It needs team topographies to be addressed. It needs culture to be addressed so that hierarchies are flattened and structures are changed. You need your infrastructure architecture to accommodate rapid release. So much needs to happen. And I think a lot of organizations didn't realize the scale of change needed before they went, let's do Scrum, because they thought it was just about teams, and it's not. It's an organizational transformation model, So the readiness is one thing, and misunderstanding what that meant and how the Scrum Master role contributed to that. The second thing is that leads on to that, I suppose, is the scaled agile frameworks and agile transformations. So I put agile transformations in inverted commas because, again, it's kind of like, so the organization decide that they're ready, but in actual fact, they're actually not ready, because the organizational transformation needed in order to accommodate Scrum or any agile methodology, there's just not the appetite for at leadership level. Now, scaled agile frameworks are not to blame for this, because the frameworks themselves, actually, I find, are really comprehensive. Like SAFe, for example, I never used to like SAFe, but having seen it work at various levels, I actually think, like any framework, like Scrum or Kanban even, they are very comprehensive when they're done properly, and SAFe does provide a lot of sort of guardrails for organizations to do this properly. So they're not to blame in themselves, but again, it's the bad implementation of these frameworks that is to blame. Because the Scrum Master role has very clear roles and responsibilities, as does the product owner, as does the Scrum development team. And when you implement something bad, when you try to implement a role badly or a framework badly, then obviously it's not going to give the benefits that it's supposed to give. So what organizations have done is they've started to revert back to what they know. So hence the hybrid roles have been introduced. So as a result of leadership mainly not understanding what they're embarking upon, not understanding how Scrum actually works, not understanding how the organization needs to look in order for Scrum to be implemented properly and the true benefits to be experienced, they've gone, oh, the teams can't do this, it's rubbish, Scrum isn't giving us what we deserve or want, we spent all this money and we're not seeing the benefits, but we still need delivery. So what they've done is gone, let's introduce a new role like a delivery lead or a product manager instead of a product owner, because then we can make it about delivery. So they introduced these hybrid roles, which have contributed massively to the dilution and actually nearly extinction of Scrum Master roles, because now organizations are going, oh, well, this means we can get somebody who's like a Scrum Master and a project manager in one. And that's not how it was ever supposed to work. And I'll talk a little bit more about roles and responsibilities in a bit. But these hybrid roles that are created as a result, a direct result of organizations not having what it takes to do Scrum properly and implement the discipline needed to do Scrum properly, and to also change the organization to fit Scrum rather than trying to fit Scrum into the organization. This has resulted in lack of delivery, which has meant we need to introduce a hybrid role now and create that project manager stroke delivery person stroke Scrum Master person. So yeah.
Is there room for a couple of questions at the moment?
Have we got some hands up?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Read them out to you if you like.
Oh, sorry, I've not got my chat on. Yeah,
That's okay.
go for it.
Question comes from Chris. He says, what percentage of organizations are actually ready for agile transformation, and are they actually agile already?
No. The answer is no. I mean, as percentage wise, well, I don't think I can put like a percentage on it, but I mean, from my experience, I just think there's a lack of knowledge and experience at leadership level that understand the implications of adopting Scrum properly. I think for too long, leadership have just depended, because, you know, the history of software development hasn't been, you know, it's always been like a hierarchical thing. And it's about, oh, well, the teams do it. They have to do it. It's up to someone else. You know, it's always up to someone else when it comes to leadership. And they've not used their influence and their power for decision making to make the decision that they need to make in order to make their organization conducive to a Scrum adoption. So, I mean, I've seen very few organizations that have the courage to do it properly. And I think mainly they don't have the courage for several reasons, because a lot of pressure on leadership to do things, to change things up and to put their own stamp on things and to prove that they're better than their predecessor, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not always the case, because it just causes a lot of disruption and industrial fatigue then. Because the organization have seen it all before by then. Everyone who works there, like, oh, another guy's come in now, and then another guy, you know, and they're in a constant state of flux and change, and it's exhausting. So, and I think, you know, the amount of leaders that stay in position from the beginning of a transformation to the end is virtually non-existent. You know, I mean, but I've only worked in large organizations, and that's commonplace for that to happen. But it doesn't mean that it's actually doing the organization any good. So percentage, right, I can't put percentage on it, but I can just say that there's a lot of inexperience, I think, at a level that needs to have the experience to do this properly, and also a lot of pressure on leaders to do things in a certain way when even maybe they don't want to. And what was the other part of that question? There was percentage bit, and then there was...
And are they actually agile already?
No. I don't think... I've not worked in any organization that's agile. And I've worked in organization a lot, you know, and they do bits that are good, certain bits that are good. But again, it's kind of like when you get to sort of more of a senior level, you still have leaders that come along wanting to change things, you know, without any data to prove that, you know, put new features in, add this, let's do this, let's do that. You know, and it's like, well, why? It's like they just have a meeting, they go, well, I think we should do this. It's like, oh God, and everything has to halt, and we start again and go in a different direction, and it just hemorrhages money. And then they're like, where's all this money gone? Why haven't we got a product yet? It's like, because you keep changing your mind. You know, so, and it's, you know, it's breaking all of these rules of Scrum and Agile, of, you know, aging work in progress, high WIP, you know, not having any WIP limits. You know, if you look at the cumulative flow diagrams historically of organizations of their projects over a couple of years, you'll see that there's often thousands of items that are work in progress that have been started, not finished, because of changes in direction from leadership themselves. So no organizations are agile. And I even think that teams that think they're agile, when you actually get into that team, when you sort of break it down, you're like, you're not though. Especially teams who adopt Kanban. You know, developers love Kanban because there are less Scrum ceremonies. And when you try and introduce Scrum, sometimes they go, well, I'm not doing that because I've been part of an Agile team, you know, for all my life. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. And it's like, well, if you were that good at it, then you'd be able to tell us all when this product is going to finish, and you can't. And then you introduce Scrum, and then suddenly, after a few sprints and their velocity stabilizes, then yeah, they can do that then. So yeah, there's that part as well. I think I've got some time to talk about that later, though, in a bit more detail around that sort of thing.
Do you want to take the next question as well, Amy?
Yeah, I have to see the chat.
The question is from Hadia. She asks, what do you think has changed about readiness if it was always the case that organizations weren't necessarily ready at any given time?
Well, I think the readiness is actually, I think because the dilution of roles like the Scrum Master and Product Owner, I think, you know, organizations aren't kind of having to challenge themselves as much anymore. They're happy with this hybrid approach. And I don't think that that's the right way for them to go, because it is not disruptive enough, and it's not going to give them actually what they need in order to get to that organizational agility. Because, and you know, transformation, you know, in order for them to be successful, they have to achieve organizational agility, which means that the organization is working like a well-oiled machine, so that they then in turn can achieve business agility, which means that they can be responsive and reactive to the market. So anything that comes their way, they can be on it before their competitors because they have organizational agility. And I think with the readiness element, I think unless there is some serious kind of investment in the leadership of organizations to fully understand what they are embarking upon and know fully how to implement that together as a leadership team, not just the CTO or just the tech people, it needs to be entire organizations that need to commit to these things. And I don't think there's enough cultural shifts at that level in order for the organization as a whole to be ready, because unless leadership are ready, then the organization isn't ready. I can see a hand. Chris Davies.
Chris, you have a comment?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Amy. I was going to ask the question about readiness. The reason I asked it is because I have seen two organizations I've personally worked at that I thought were actually pretty agile already, because they had gone through that process of changing leadership roles and structure, of creating self-organizing teams. And they'd got to the point where they were releasing code on an almost daily basis, etc. You know, they had very low WIP limits, their defect count was in single digits, that sort of thing, right? They were pretty damn agile. None of them were doing Scrum. Not one of them. All of the other organizations I've worked at, and I've been doing Agile since about 2008, all of the others were, as you said, they weren't Agile at all. The problem I have had is this assumption with Scrum that we have to change all of the parts of the organization in order for it to be ready before we can adopt Scrum. Now, Scrum itself, the Scrum guide says it's difficult to master, right? Yeah, of course it is, because it implies that we have to change everything around the organization in order to make it work, but it gives us no guidance whatsoever about how to go about doing that, right?
100%. I completely agree with that, Chris. That latter statement is 100% true, because the Scrum Guide just shows you how to do so many, right? It just says this, you know, what each item is for, etc., etc. It doesn't, it says what the purpose is and what the outcome should be, but not actually how to do it in practice. There's no practical advice whatsoever. And I think this is why leadership have failed so much. And to your point, exactly, there is no how to do this. It's just, I think Scrum was naive. I think the Scrum Guide, the concept of Scrum was naive, because it did not understand the rigidity of organizations that have been working in this way for such a long time, that have been output driven as opposed to outcome driven, and the hierarchical organizational culture and what that means, and how people identify as these traditional roles, as I am a project manager, I am a business analyst, I am not a Scrum Master, I am not a product owner, you know. And I think it completely underestimated how complex the psychology of change affects people and the identities that people hold on to. Because if you've got a BA or a project manager who's Prince 2 certified, and they've been doing this for 20 years and they're very good at it, and then you come along and say everything you know is wrong, everything you think is, all your value that you attribute to yourself is now adding no value, you know, that's going to hurt. That's never going to go down well. So I think what organizations didn't do, and what Scrum didn't do, is understand the emotional impact on people. And I think that's where they've lost a lot of battles, because people's egos got in the way, and also people's kind of feelings of security got in the way. Because again, if you've been a really, really good business analyst for 20 years, and then you suddenly have to adopt a new skill set, you're going to have a lot of fear. You're going to think, what if I can't do this? I don't want to.
I agree.
You know, people don't like change. I mean, I'm a change agent, and I don't even like change. You know what I mean?
I agree. I think the whole, you know, that you talk about change agent, and just last year, I was at a global financial services company. You'll recognize the name, but I was asked to do the introduction and initial transition to Scrum ways of working, or Kanban, the teams could choose. But it was about making Agile a group of something between 15 and 20 teams, I forget exactly, within a tribe, right? And the part of the problems we had was that most of, if not all of those teams could not have a product owner. I don't mean didn't have, they could not have, because the organizational structure, I mean, the entirety of their IT organization was structured around platform teams effectively. In other words, they served multiple, each of them served multiple business areas, okay? There was no product, except in a technical sense. There was no business leader who could be a product owner. They had 8 of them. When you try to come in with this mindset that Scrum is the answer to everything, and it's the organization's fault if it's not implemented correctly, is extremely naive. When you try to tell people that you've got 8 people who are your key stakeholders, who's going to be the product owner? Well, none of them are. That's just one example.
So what I will say is, so again, this is where I think that there is a lack of experience in leadership. Because if leadership come along and say Scrum for everything, then that says there's a lack of experience there. Because for me personally, I believe that Scrum is highly effective for products, new products, right? But that's it. Everything else Kanban all the way. Because the nature of the organization you were talking about, that, platform teams, Kanban all the way, because it's little things of different things, many work streams coming into one platform, that can be part of one backlog and constantly prioritized, but it's Kanban all the way, where it is about throughput still, because it's just bits and bits and bits all the time. Whereas with products and new features, yes, Scrum 100% all the way, because the ceremonies are built specifically for that nature of work. Right. So that's my opinion on this. And I think this is another reason, though, why the Scrum Master role has become, so devalued, is because Scrum Masters have been expected to sort of run Scrum teams that aren't Scrum teams, and, have teams where they've got multiple work streams in one Scrum team. When actually it should all be a Kanban team, but there's no Kanban master, is there? It's Scrum Master or an Agile coach. So nobody's there to sort of champion Kanban in the same way that a Scrum Master is supposed to. So, and I think that organizations are sort of, if they think that in one way they like Kanban because there's no ceremonies, and think, oh, brilliant, that's more time for the guys to develop stuff and write code. But on the other hand, it's much harder to predict for a product when you're going to finish product, because the nature of the estimation and velocity is not inherent to that process. And I've got some examples at the end of this talk on where I transitioned a team from pure Kanban to Scrum, specifically so that we could estimate timescales. And that's not a bad thing either. So anyway, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get on. So the point I was making is this proper Scrum was all just too hard. Now, bearing in mind that we've just spoken about Scrum and when it excels, which is in new products, not in, keeping lights on BAU stuff, it was all just too hard, because even if teams were doing their best to adopt these roles, it wasn't supported and hasn't been supported by leadership to truly understand what those teams need in order for them to flourish as a Scrum team. So what can be done about this then? How can we revive the Scrum Master and make sure that these roles are protected for these products? And the first thing is, let's go back to basics. Let's go back to roles and responsibilities. Okay, because again, an erosion of a role and responsibility of the 3 main roles of Scrum is going to result in these roles becoming extinct and these hybrid roles coming in. So as we all know, we've got the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the Scrum development team in a Scrum team, right? But I don't think enough is spoken about in terms of the motivation. The Scrum Guide certainly doesn't talk about this either. So I'm going to talk about it now. So we're looking at the character traits and motivations, right? So when we look at the product owner should be motivated by delivery. And I think this is where the Scrum Master and the product owner role have been messed up, because people thought, or organizations have thought, or leadership have thought, because it's a tech thing, because the technical team are building this, therefore the technical team are responsible for delivery. But that's not the case. As if we do Scrum properly, it's not the case. It's up to the product owner to be responsible for delivery in the fact that they prioritize the backlog in order to deliver potentially shippable code in an increment. So when I talk about delivery, I'm not talking about coding, building, that's building. I'm talking about delivering a feature, because obviously that feature's got funding, that feature's got buy-in, that feature is, you know, hopefully has been decided at leadership level that it's going to be a good idea, right? So they're responsible. And by the way, I like to be a little bit controversial, but it's not controversial if we actually think about it. The product owner role is supposed to be about organizing those sprints around building small increments of a product. Okay, and it's their responsibility to communicate MI on progress, whether it's a sprint progress or whether it's a quarterly progress report, whatever they need to do, because they're still responsible for feeding information back to the organization at whatever level the organization needs that, and whatever detail, you know, whether it be metrics or whatever. But the product owner is responsible for delivery. So they're also responsible for writing user stories. And I think, again, when Scrum is implemented, what's actually happened is, like I said, the organization goes, okay, well, you know, we're trying to bring business and technical teams together. So the technical teams are delivering this, therefore it's up to them to deliver. So what they've done is actually put the responsibility of delivery in the hands of the least experienced people with delivery. Technical people aren't experienced delivery people. They're not product people, they're developers. So, you know, obviously that's not going to work. So we need to have the product owner responsible for that delivery element, knowing exactly what features or what parts of the feature or elements of those epics they need delivering every single sprint that all contribute to that feature's overall build, right? So yes, they need to be writing the user stories. If there are technical stories, obviously that's the Scrum development team. And, you know, that's to do with keeping the lights on, that's to do with maintenance, tech debt, anything like that, that is not part specifically of that product, or unless it's something that has to happen in order for a user story to happen, technically wise, that's different. But when it comes to user stories, as in that feature and how that feature will be used by a user, that is a product owner responsibility. So I'm motivated by the delivery of that increment, right? The Scrum Master should be motivated by the Scrum process and is motivated to uphold the Scrum process. And by that, I don't mean like rigid kind of, we have to do, but it has to be like this, it has to be like that. This is where the sort of character traits of a really good Scrum Master come into play, because they are very creative when it comes to getting the outcomes of what's intended for each ceremony in a way that isn't necessarily in the Scrum Guide. So, for example, in the past, I've not done like backlog grooming, but what I have done is made sprint planning kind of 2 meetings. I put what I've called the story time meeting in a couple of days in advance of sprint planning, which is where all the team gets together just to talk about the candidates for the next sprint and give a gut feel of whether they can get through them or not. And then sprint planning is about just going through those stories and breaking them down into technical tasks and estimating them. So overall, it made sprint planning, the outcome was still the same by the end of sprint planning, which was everybody was sure about the sprint ahead that they could achieve it, and everybody understood all the tasks, and everybody kind of was on board, and we had all the stories estimated, but it was like doing it in a different way outside of the Scrum Guide. But ultimately, what is important to remember is that the Scrum Guide is like, gospel. So you were trying to get the same results, but in different ways. And I think what happens with the degradation of the Scrum role, because the Scrum Master has been constantly sort of changed, or not even in existence in organizations, this driver for the Scrum process and upholding the outcomes of these particular meetings in the Scrum process has also been lost as well. And therefore the experience has not been there, I don't think, for some people, and that's why Scrum Master roles aren't necessarily working, because these guys haven't had the experience of trying different things to get those outcomes. And then finally, developers, the Scrum development team, responsible for the build, so that's developing and testing potentially shippable code in a sprint, and they're motivated by quality, right? So when you combine those three motivations together of delivery from the product owner, the guardian of the Scrum process by the Scrum Master, and the facilitator and all that sort of anything to do with the Scrum process, Scrum Master, and the quality motivated by the Scrum development team, those three come together to provide that really good natural tension. So the product owner is going to want to bypass the Scrum process all the time to get more delivery in, right? He's going to always want to push for more features or more work. And the Scrum Master is the one that pushes back, because he's the custodian of the Scrum process and knows that, velocity is velocity, don't exceed it, and you don't add stuff in sprints, you don't change, and all this sort of stuff. And they do everything to ensure that those sprints are successful, and again, uses creativity in order to set various meetings up with various people, removing the blockers in sprint and all this sort of stuff. And obviously developers might want to gold plate stuff, go, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And, and again, Scrum Master steps in and says, no. Product owner can step in and say, no, it's not my priority, etc. So when these roles work properly together, that natural tension of their motivations is a good thing, and it's when these motivations are diffused amongst the team in the wrong way that the outcomes of the sprint are like maximum or optimal, should I say. Alex, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just because you referenced the Scrum Guide, I'm just emphasizing that the product owner isn't really about delivery, it's about maximizing value. And in the Scrum Guide, it talks about, again, just going to Scrum Guide, about the Scrum Master being accountable for team effectiveness. So I think there's, again, I'll emphasize the whole Scrum team is about collectively creating a valuable increment every single sprint. So I think there's some missing.
I think the product owner they have to champion the delivery of the product that is supposed to be adding value.
I totally agree. I say that the product owner should be the captain of the ship. You're their direction. Yeah. You should be all together. So they should be champion of value. But it's again, product delivery is a team sport, and we're in it together and we're collaborating. So product owners shouldn't be really like creating user stories. They should be actually collaborating, actually driving conversations. So user stories is actually driving a conversation, not about capturing. That's from the Scrum Guide, and as you said,
I know, yeah.
That's what I wanted to emphasize. So
I get what you're saying, but I'm trying to give an account of kind of what my experiences have been. And I think when these roles stick, very firmly to their responsibilities, that's when it works, because, and yes, teams do deliver together, they add value together and everything, but they still have their own skill sets and they still have their own disciplines, and And I think that what's happened over the years is that I think the business has lent too much on developers to do the role of product owner, because the product owner doesn't know how to be a product owner. They don't know, they're not writing user stories. They say that, oh, I'm too busy. It's like, well, what are you too busy with to not write user stories for your own team? So what I found has worked best is when the product owner writes the user stories and the epics as well, because then they're familiar with their backlog. Then they know exactly what story is part of what epic, and then they can help drive, those sort of meetings with the Scrum Master facilitating as well. And, it helps guide the team as well, because the team shouldn't be making decisions around the product. That the Scrum team, as in the Scrum development team, shouldn't be making those decisions around the product, because they're not the expert in that area. They're not the product person. They're not,
One of the biggest things I see as product owners is that product owners are too busy focusing on product backlog management and not focusing on the why. So the goals. So there's dysfunctions is that a lot of product owners aren't actually focused on goals. So as Scrum Masters, we should be championing that and valuing, like, guys, what's our goals? So again, trusting our team to say, are we aligned with this? So
yeah,
that
exactly.
for me, I actually delegate a lot of the product backlog management if my team has got awesome direction goals. Again, depends on maturity. I'm not saying yes or no, but I'll emphasize is that actually it's more about championing that than actually product backlog management. Again, that's just my experience and from my, so I'll just,
And I think for me, if the product owner is too busy on something else, the organizational design is wrong. You've not got anybody championing the product at a team level, if that's the case. The product owner should be cognizant of what the quarterly goal is for that team and that product, right? And those goals should be broken down into KPIs that product owner creates. And that product owner is so aware of those KPIs that epics are created in order for those KPIs to be met. And then those epics are broken down into user stories and assigned in the sprints, right? And I believe that is a product owner role. And if that product owner isn't doing that role, then that's when it's going wrong, because people like the Scrum Master or the team are doing that role, and that's not the person who should be doing that role. They should be, the team should be free to create the code that is needed for that particular increment, right?
So when you say, sorry to interrupt, when you say team, what does that include?
I mean the Scrum development team. So anybody technical involved in building and testing that code.
Would your developers, say when we say team, we mean Scrum
developer, tester, yeah.
Do you mean any, but what about BAs, UX?
Yeah.
They include in developers as well?
Well, no, not in the Scrum development team, because there's only 3 roles are like, developer, tester. The BA isn't a Scrum role. And I think, sorry.
Yeah, per the Scrum guide, it is anyone.
Yeah, so it's not a Scrum role, is it? So
No,
what I'm saying is that
the developer, they're developers.
Developers and the testers, yeah, and etc., are part of the technical teams, or if it's a cloud developer, or whether it's a DBA, whatever technical person is needed in order for that increment to be realized. Now, I have also worked with teams where UX are part of the team, but I wouldn't consider them part of the Scrum development team. They're still part of the overall Scrum team. But you work differently with them and BAs as well, if they're helping a product owner, because the reason that we've still got BAs is basically because the product owner role isn't being done properly. If the product owner role was being a proper product owner, that is what BAs do. The product owner was looking ahead and doing all that stuff that a BA would do, and making sure that those stories are what I would call sprint fit, then they're working 2-3 sprints ahead of the team, as well as being available for the current sprint for the team and doing all that BA work themselves. you know. So this is again why Scrum has fallen apart, because these roles and responsibilities have not been fulfilled because the organizations hasn't said, right, this is what a PO is. BAs have great skills to be a PO, but I don't think organizations have pushed that leap enough to say, right, do you want to reskill as a PO? Do you want to reskill as a Scrum Master? We'll give you the training, etc. But it takes a really long time for these skills to develop, you know. So that's just my personal opinion. If there's other organizations that have done things better, great, you know. But I guess I'm just talking about how organizations over time have chipped away at what the intention behind these roles was supposed to be, and why this now has resulted in the Scrum Master role being in the position that it is, hybrid roles coming in, bona fide Scrum Mastery becoming extinct. So yeah, I guess like you kind of well, my next point is like, what happens when this is not the case? Well, things go awry when this isn't the case. And I get that it's really difficult. And going back to that slide, it's just too hard. It is very hard from a practical perspective, but also from a cultural perspective, to shift into new roles when you are a BA or you are a project manager or you are whatever traditional role, and now you're expected to do something else. It's really difficult, and getting that experience is difficult. And I completely get that. And again, going back to Chris's point, organizations and Scrum itself was really naive and didn't address those problems, and didn't address the resistance that would come as a result of such drastic changes, really. But what I can say is when these roles are done really, really well, and even with a BA being part of these roles, because I've worked in teams where we do have a product manager, but a BA as well, it does work really, really well, because the BA is essentially a proxy product owner and is working on behalf of that product manager or product owner to help write the stories. But the overall responsibility for those stories is the product owner or the product manager, if that's what they're called in certain organizations. And they still have to be familiar with their backlog. It's not someone else's responsibility. And I think that's the point I'm trying to drive at, is that too many product owners place the responsibility of the backlog in the Scrum Master and team's hands when it should be in their hands. But just a little bit, I thought of when it comes to Scrum Master role, though. I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? And that's what Scrum Masters need to be thinking like. You know, like when I invented that story time meeting, that's in response to thinking, this doesn't work, so I'm going to do this. It doesn't add any more time to the team. In fact, it means that they're in meetings less, but it's more effective. So if a Scrum Master is really good at doing that and facilitating meetings really, really well, the team don't get annoyed with it because meetings run properly and they're efficient and they add value. So yeah. So hence why the Scrum Master is the hero and also the villain. I'm going to explain. So obviously they're the hero because they're teaching the teams how to do Scrum really, really well. Okay, that's their job. They should know Scrum like the back of their hands. They should just know what to do in every single situation to help the team stay on track. You know, in the daily stand-ups, how do they make sure that the team have, are on track for the sprint goal? How do they ask those questions? How do they make, how do they do stuff to make the team work to the best of their ability? Because the team needs to just relax and let the Scrum Master take that role properly of prompting them when the Scrum process isn't being adhered to properly, or the Scrum process that they have implemented themselves, So they're championing Scrum all the time. So they need to let them, and this is again why I'm talking about heroes and villains here, the Scrum Master needs to be a villain as well, because an experienced Scrum Master will be able to see exactly where a team is going wrong. And the Scrum Master should be able to call the team out on where they think they're going wrong. Because a Scrum Master's not there to sort of just go, okay, let's just try this. Oh, all this kind of, there's only so much a Scrum Master can deal with, like taking a team on a journey before they get to the point where you're like, guys, you're just not listening. Oh, you need to do this now, right? And this is why they need to be the villain as well, the hero and the villain. And I think teams need to let the Scrum Master be that person as well, because they need to be empowered to have the ability to say, guys, look, please try this. Honestly, I think it's going to work. And the team just needs to try and trust them. And I do understand that everyone will say, oh, but we all have to say that we all need to think that we all need to buy it. Okay, fine. So I'm going to ask everyone a question now. Well, actually, no, I'm going to ask the developers. Have we got any developers on the call? Give me your hands. Show me your hands. All developers, show me hands. Just got one developer. That can't be true. Well, anyway, out of everybody that's on the call, right? How many times has a Scrum Master told you how to do your job? Anybody? No? Alex, Scrum Master ever told you how to code? No.
I hope not. No.
Exactly. So I can't tell you how many times teams have told me as a Scrum Master or an Agile coach how to do my job. So I think this is again where Scrum Master roles have been eroded, because teams think that they know better all the time. And if they don't want to do something, they say, oh, well, we don't want to do that just yet. Let's try something else, and it's kind of like the Scrum Master needs to be able to help the team to help themselves through their own experience. Okay. And the teams that say, we've been working in Agile all this, for years and years and years, we're a really highly experienced Agile team. And I'll get to you in a minute, Andrew. I'll get to you in a minute. So we're a really experienced Agile team. We've been doing Agile for a long time. Does that necessarily mean that you've been doing Agile well? What if you don't know any other Agile way of working? What if this has been the only organization you've worked in for 20 years? How do you know anything different? You might think you're doing really good work, but compared to something else, maybe you're not. And again, it's kind of like you say, but you perfectly fine in Kanban, do you want to move Scrum? Okay, well, you tell me then why you can't tell me when you can finish something or whatever. If you were that great, then we wouldn't be in this position of having to think about, why isn't it working? Why haven't we got anywhere where we need to be yet? Why didn't we foresee this? Why didn't we do this? Right? So letting a Scrum Master help you, help the team, shouldn't be something that is seen as a bad thing. Because it shouldn't get to the point where, like I have done in the past, advise the team on how to succeed, and then thought, I'm not getting anywhere with the team, and just allowed them to fail on purpose in order for them to listen next sprint. There shouldn't be that level of arrogance in a team, I don't think. But Andrew, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm Scrum Master and listening with interest to all that you're saying. The thing you haven't covered, I don't know whether it'll cover later on, you'll cover it later on, but in my experience, a lot of Scrum Masters are quite poor. They focus on facilitation rather than really helping the team. And in those instances, I can imagine engineers saying to the Scrum Master, this is how we should be doing it. Because with the Scrum Master, you do a 2 days course, suddenly you're a certified Scrum Master earning a good salary.
Yeah.
And I wonder if sometimes devs are pushing back against Scrum Masters because the standard of Scrum Mastery, in my limited experience, admittedly, is very poor.
Oh, God, 100%.
And I hope I'm not one of the poor ones, but I will often, even though I've got a lot of experience, I will often ask engineers, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about, holding a refinement session a day early or, so I think it should be a collaborative thing. in terms of it shouldn't be the Scrum Master dictating this is how a Scrum is and we need to do it this way. It should be more like, this is what I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I hear you. I totally hear you. So there's two things there that I want to address. One is the experience side of things, and two is the sort of dictatorship side of things that you mentioned. So it's like I said earlier, getting the experience in these roles as Scrum Master and Product Owner from being a BA or being a project manager or being a team leader or whatever takes a lot of time. And and you're absolutely correct that you can take a course and then suddenly you're certified and then you start out in Scrum Mastery. And if we go back to the motivations that I mentioned around the Scrum Master being motivated by the Scrum process, and they need to know the Scrum process like the back of their hand, because if they don't, then you don't know how to bend the Scrum rules without breaking them. And every single Agile team that I've worked in that have adopted Scrum, I've bent the rules without breaking them, such as introducing the story time meeting so that sprint planning can be shorter and there's no need for backlog grooming or backlog refinement. So that's bent the rules because you're not allowed to, you can get away with not doing that if you introduce something that makes it better. Like the outcome is the same. The outcome by the close of sprint planning is that the team understand the user stories, they're broken down into tasks, estimated, off we go. The sprint goal is achievable, right? And how we go about the various meetings to get to that point is the difference between a really experienced Scrum Master and a Scrum Master who just goes, whatever, doesn't understand. And that's why it's really important that they understand the outcomes of every single ceremony so that they know how to manipulate that process for whatever the team can take at the time in order to get there, and also help the team long term. So, for example, for new teams that are really inexperienced, for example, I just focus on, not necessarily a sprint goal. I just say, right, stories. Can you definitely get through these stories and that, get that velocity stabilized? And then when you've got that stabilized velocity, then you can start to be more structured in terms of sprint goals for the product, etc. With return, so that's the experience side of things. So the dictatorship side of things. Now, it's kind of like one extreme or the other. If you've got poor Scrum Mastery, then they don't make any contribution or add any value. But if you've got a dictator, even like if they know best, then they're not going to win either. So it's a really difficult kind of balance to strike. And I myself have been in positions where I've been highly frustrated by a team that just do not take advice. And even if you say, let's do this, let's do that, and it's like painstakingly slow for any change to happen. It's like, right, let's just do this now. Because at the end of the day, an organization still expects delivery. And again, it's that really difficult call of when do you put your foot down and say, this is what we're doing now, because we've done it your way for 20 weeks or whatever, and it's not worked doing it like this now. I'm, sick of arguing with you about it. And I've had those conversations before in teams, and everyone, oh my God, that's happened. Yes, it has happened. Sometimes you have to literally just say, guys, no, it's not going to work. As long as you can sort of back it up with evidence and sort of say, well, X, Y, Z, and using metrics really helps as well, because that really helped me influence the team before. It's like, well, let's look at the last let's look at the last 10 sprints then, and see what you've done then. Now let's do this and see if it makes a difference. So it's a very difficult one. And I think if we just look at the next point, don't give up in the storming phase, it kind of is something to do with readiness as well. But if teams give up, or if organizations, for that matter, give up in the storming phase, which is where a really skilled Agile coach or Scrum Master comes in and shakes it up and says, right, this isn't what, I don't think this is working, this, and this, because blah, 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 blah. you know, that's going to create a disruption, because change is disruptive, and it should be, and that's good, you know, because long term for the organization, that's what they need, because if they're not delivering, then they wouldn't have got an agile coach in, would they? So yeah, it's kind of like that storming phase. People are going to be disgruntled, people aren't going to like it, and that person, that change agent, is the face of change, so it can get very personal towards that one person, Scrum Master, Agile coach, or whoever, you know. So they just need to sort of go through that storming phase and then see the benefits for themselves, because I find that you can talk about the benefits all day long. If you do this, this will happen, but the team won't actually believe it. The Scrum team, I mean, and mainly developers, won't actually believe it unless they've experienced it for themselves. And they're only going to experience it for themselves sometimes if you say, you're going to have to try it now. Why don't you do it like this now for 3 sprints? And if you're a good Scrum Master, you know it's going to work. It's going to work. You wouldn't make that kind of decision on a whim. You wouldn't do anything to make the team look bad. Every decision a Scrum Master makes is orientated around the Scrum process to make the team look the best they can, and for the team to deliver to the best of their ability, right? So this brings me to the deal. Now, I talk about the deal when I work at teams, with teams. I've talked about this a lot. So the deal is, if as the business, as in a product owner and a Scrum Master, we can facilitate meetings to make them valuable, and we provide you with the requirements for our user stories to the best of our ability that you all understand and you're all happy with, then in return, you deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Okay, or I'm going to change my wording. You build what you say you're going to build in the timescales that you say you're going to build it in, right? And what I'm talking about, the deal, and you know, the deal is about mutual respect between all 3 roles in the Scrum team. Okay, so the product owner spends the time to understand their backlog and to write the user stories, and to make sure that those acceptance criteria aren't, you know, ambiguous, that everybody's clear, that the stories aren't too big, they've got all the information they need, they've got all the assets they need, various sides of the business, they understand this, they understand, you know, the product owner is clear and is setting a vision and providing those stories in a prioritized order. They've done their bit. And then the Scrum Master has made sure that the right ceremonies are at the right time with the right people in the right level of detail. They're strong facilitators, the timing, they're doing all this sort of stuff. Scrum Master's done their bit as opposed on with regards to the Scrum process. Then the team needs to do their bit. The Scrum development team needs to do their bit in terms of delivering quality increment. And if they can't for any reason, then part of that deal is that they need to let the product owner and Scrum Master know, because that's fair, that's respectful, right? So it's kind of like that. And I think this has not been working, because I think because those roles and responsibilities have been blurred or completely, you know, just wrong in so many ways in a lot of places, those 3 motivations don't allow for a deal to happen. That deal can't be constructed, because if you don't have the clarity on roles and responsibilities, how can you do your bits, right? So when thinking about roles and responsibilities, think about the deal. Okay, who's going to do what in order for that Scrum team to deliver? And yeah, go back to what I was saying earlier about those 3 roles having those tensions. So next, the role of leadership, I think, again, has had a massive impact on the Scrum Master role, because, again, going back to Chris's point, the Scrum Guide does nothing to talk about the cultural shifts that's needed in order for Scrum to succeed. I think the Scrum Master role has been massively misunderstood and massively kind of unsupported. You know, I think back to the early days when I was the first Scrum Master, like nobody knew what Scrum Master did or what it was for. You know, those three sort of motivations and the responsibilities of the three clearly not understood. And I think that has contributed massively to the degradation of Scrum across the board. Because if leadership don't understand the true nature of these roles, then the organisation doesn't have a chance. And the fact that hybrid roles exist is evidence enough that leadership don't understand the differences of the roles and what their purpose is and how they contribute to the delivery of an increment, right? So I think the role of leadership has got a lot to play a part in this, because leaders have just gone, you know, oh, Scrum isn't working. We need a delivery person and an agile person. So let's invent a delivery lead then, right? And that's what's happened, I think. And again, going back to my disclaimer, this is just my personal opinion, over 20 years in this industry. So I think, you know, I'd love it if leaders just really could get those three roles and responsibilities and implement them properly, organize their organization to make it conducive to those roles and go from there. Because I remember I can't remember whether it was Andrew or whether it was Chris who was talking about, it might have been Chris actually, you know, changing the whole organization before you implement Scrum. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think you have to change the entire organization before you implement Scrum, but I do think you have to change your product function and your technology function to be ready to change for Scrum. Okay, so I believe change a small bit first, 1 or 2 teams, and then scale good stuff from there. So the organization changes at a slower pace rather than big bang, right? Big bang never works ever for anything. So yeah. So just before we sort of close, and I've just got a few examples here of some Scrum Master magic, or some Scrum magic really, and just from a few organizations I've worked in the past. And so I was a delivery lead at John Lewis for like 2.5 years. And what I found in one of the teams that I worked in, which was really good, it was a Kanban team, and they were very adamant that they did not want to move to Scrum, but they were building a new product. And very, very experienced developers, and, you know, the same sort of feedback of, you know, we're very experienced developers, we've been working in Agile teams forever. And my argument was like, yeah, but we really need to know some timescales, and we're only going to get that if we move to Scrum, working in sprints, where we estimate stories and we build up our velocity, and we start to know, you know, how to estimate epic level, etc., etc. You know, because yes, they're very experienced developers, but we weren't able to predict anything. And I'm sure lots of you will resonate with this story, because developers think that because they are developers working in an Agile organization, that they automatically have to be amazing at Kanban or Scrum. And that's not the case. That's what Scrum Master's for. You don't have to be, okay? The Scrum Master will help you with that. So what happened was eventually I convinced them to move to Scrum. And, you know, mainly because it was, you know, it would be a very powerful lever for them if they could have stable velocity. The department itself was under a lot of pressure to deliver. So I was like, this is just going to be in your interest, blah, blah, blah. I will not let you fail, etc. Ultimately, what happened was we moved to Scrum, and within 3 to 4 sprints, we did achieve a stable velocity because I guided them through that situation and changed some ways of working to facilitate Scrum properly. And yeah, took feedback from the BA and user experience and things. So we had sort of same stand-ups, for example, but we'd have 2 different boards, one for you know, user stories that were being refined by the BA, and a board for UX, so that we could see what was coming up. Because, you know, UX are like sprints ahead, right? So that's when it worked really well. So it's kind of like, let's do this and let's do that, and let's modify our current ways of working, which for the BAs wasn't working because there wasn't enough time in the Kanban system that they had existing already to sort of get the stories together in time in a sprint, because sometimes it might take them more than a sprint to get stories ready, right? So I suppose like I suppose the UX and the BAs were kind of working a bit more. Well, it's always Scrumban. It's never just a Scrum board, is it, with to do and progress done, right? I always extrapolate the workflow. But, you know, the BAs just knew that they needed to have enough stories ready for the next sprint, etc. So it might, you know, take them a few sprints, but that's why it works really well with the product manager, to sort of keep that, you know, that helmsman through those, you know, sort of steering the team ultimately. And ultimately, yeah, they gain a stable velocity, which actually in the long run just like really helped them out, because the rest of the organization or rest of this division was like under major pressure to deliver, and my team was kind of like exempt from that, because we were like, well, you putting this process on us now isn't going to do anything, because we've already got stable velocity. We can already tell you how long something's going to take, and they were really accurate as well with it. So ultimately it saved them from a lot of pain from having to essentially go back to waterfall. That was what the business was saying at that point. We need to go back to waterfall because we understand waterfall, we don't understand this. So it's kind of like, okay, that was a successful that particular team. And you know, I'm friends with those guys now, so you know, I don't think even though it was difficult for them at the time, now they're like, oh yeah, that was actually all right, that. And it was an amazing showcase for the rest of the organization on how things could work if it's done properly. And then at Centre Parks, you know, I was brought in by their CTO to help out with the delivery of a major project that was already running behind. They'd commissioned a third party to build their new website based on the fact that the same provider had built their Aquasana proposition, which is like their day spa, and they estimated that the main website was like 3 times more complex, but they hadn't estimated it properly at all at the beginning. It was just like the people involved at the estimation stage was just like a couple of guys having a chat sort of thing. It was just like totally not structured. So yeah, CTO brought me in and he was just great. Really, really amazing CTO, a guy called Craig Umbler. And he was just really innovative and really creative, and he just had loads of, you know, courage. He was really courageous. He was just like, do whatever you need to do. So ultimately what happened was, again, implemented Scrum, made some changes in the team. There was like 3 UK teams, 2 teams in India, made some changes to the structure of the teams, changed some roles around. Yeah, and they went from not having a clue of when they're going to deliver to then essentially knowing exactly what was going to happen and when and how much they were going to get through by this deadline, which ultimately meant that we could prove that the original estimation by the third party was completely unrealistic and it wasn't achievable. I actually got the third party and Centre Park's own developers to work together on that re-estimation. So it wasn't, nobody could sort of say, well, of course your team are going to say that, because it was actually them as well. But I wouldn't have been able to do that unless a team had a stable velocity, which they did after 3 or 4 sprints. You know, it was quite a tough slog for them. I must admit, it was definitely a tough slog for me. But ultimately, you know, what happened was we were able to prove that they weren't going to deliver in time. and that the original estimate was completely underestimated. And we ended up getting a lot of money back so that they could deliver the product with, you know, squads being delivered for free, essentially, which accounted for a significant figure, shall we say. And then finally at Oakbrook, again, business teams and technical teams weren't really talking. Again, it's kind of like a massive misunderstanding of what Scrum was and what Scrum Master did and all this sort of stuff. And so what happened is, you know, kind of just refined that process, just polished it up, and got actual, you know, business people to come in and help organize the next couple of sprints. We actually did a big sprint plan up until the deadline, which was looming, of all the stories that we wanted in each sprint, you know, and that was kind of like the target for each sprint. So it was very visual. We had a war room, you know, like any of you back in the day remember the war rooms? For those of you who don't know what a war room is, it's like one room dedicated to that project where there's post-it notes everywhere, and it's just like, yeah, it's a room of creativity and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we had a war room, we had all of our sprints mapped out with all the user stories and all the epics associated, and it was like really, really cool. And again, yeah, difficult at the start. Everyone was like, don't like this, you know, difficult, it is difficult, but we ripped off that band-aid and off we went. And then we ended up delivering that major feature. It came in like a couple of days early in the end. Yeah, so really good wins when teams and leadership are courageous and they let Agile coaches and Scrum Masters like do their thing and get other people to do what they need to do so that the team can do their thing, right? So yeah, to conclude, how to save our Scrum Masters then? Obviously leadership, top-down support from leadership. If there's buy-in at the top level, and I'm talking like, you know, C-suite, directorate, if there is buy-in at that level and real understanding that contributes to the buy-in, by the way, they really need to know why and have a vision, then that support will cascade down. And then Scrum Masters won't be afraid to upset anyone, you know, because it's part of their job to be a bit of a villain sometimes. Performance empathy in the storming phase as well, you know, because I think organizations introduce Scrum and not really understand that it's going to cost them when it comes to delivery for a bit, right? So there needs to be empathy in the storming phase while the team storm and get angry and create a lot of noise, and show that they're disgruntled and they don't like the change, because no one likes change, even me. But, you know, yeah, leaders need to be empathetic to that stage and just be calm and just, you know, keep calm and carry on sort of thing. And if the Scrum Master or an Agile coach is experienced enough, then the teams will get through it actually performing way better than they did before. But, you know, just kind of like not let the noise get to them a bit. And then finally, that will increase the likelihood of long-term anchoring, because if leadership do kind of like maintain resilience throughout this process, you know, make sure that the people they put in the right people in the first place to actually have the experience to bring a team through, then yeah, that's more likely to stick. Because then what happens is some teams start to do so well that other teams are like, that team's doing really well. What are they doing? Let's have a chat. And that's how you can get like chapters and guilds set up, and, you know, it goes from there and it scales organically, which is really good. Then clarity on roles and responsibilities. So that's really important, like we've discussed, and what happens when those roles and responsibilities aren't clear. You know, each team should be very clear on who's doing what and when, so you can hold each other accountable as well. It's like, well, you're the product owner, you should have written those stories and they're not ready, and don't blame us if we can't deliver. It's part of the deal. Remember the deal? Exactly. So roles and responsibility and clarity around what people are doing when, you know, so that everyone is accountable for that, and it eradicates confusion and it empowers all the Scrum roles to perform. Okay, so it's not just about the Scrum Master, it's about all of those roles being able to do what they should be doing. Okay, I have to go back now. Sorry, just literally pressed my keypad. Yeah, go back to the slideshow. Yeah, so, and then finally, let the Scrum Master be the hero and the villain. So they're the hero because they are the custodian of that process, and they should know it's the back of their hand, and they want to do everything to save the day for you guys, for the team, right? That's what the Scrum Master should be seen as. The hero wants to save you all from having to do whatever you don't need to do. They want to be there for you. They want to make you succeed. They want to be there to help you thrive. That's the hero element. But the villain bit is that sometimes they have to be the bad guy, and let them be the bad guy. It's okay. Get over it. They know what they're doing if they are good. You know, this resistance and, you know, hypersensitivity just kind of has to stop a bit, you know, because a good Scrum Master will not suggest anything that will set you up for failure. They will suggest everything to set you up for success. So let them, and if it all goes horribly wrong, then talk about it in the retrospective. But yeah, good Scrum Master needs to be the hero and the villain. So empower Scrum Masters to steer the team in the right direction without fear, because obviously don't want to upset anyone, but you're upsetting the Scrum Master by telling them what to do all the time and not letting them do their job, right? So then you'll see the benefits manifest much quicker. Okay, so just let them do their job, let them be empowered, and you'll see the benefits for yourself. And then finally, protect the role from erosion of extinction, because the more that we push back on Scrum Masters and the more that we don't want a Scrum Master, it's also, by proxy, threatening the product owner role as well. You know, so all works together. So let the Scrum Master be the Scrum Master, let the product owner be the product owner, remain the motivations that I mentioned before, again, just my experience. And things will very quickly materialize better for everyone. Okay, I'm done. That was a bit longer than I expected. But hey, you wanted a longer chat, didn't you, Mohammed? So there we go. Any questions?
So we've got maybe a couple of minutes for questions. So if there are any, or if there's any comments that anyone's put on the chat that we may not have picked up already, feel free to raise it now. It may have already been answered. So let's take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll go to closing. Feel free to.
Oh, I just put hang on, what I need to do on here actually. Forgot. Where this Laura Mipsum is, I'll put my details on. Find me on LinkedIn or email me at Amy Thompson at Scrum. Sorry, what am I talking about? Scrum.mum@gmail.com. Wrong email address. Yeah. Scrum.mum@gmail.com if you want to email me or get me on LinkedIn, and we can have a chat if you want as well. But I hope you enjoyed that, by the way. If it was interesting for everybody.
Any questions, comments?
Yeah, I'll come off the mute. I think one comment I've got, I mean, I've been a Scrum Master 10 years, and let's see if the others see the same comment on this. Senior management can never get their head round turning the ship around. So I've always thought that the Scrum Master's primary goal is protect the team. Okay, the team are the ones who know how long the work's going to take and so on. But I've worked in various organizations where they're still in sort of what you'd call management 1.0 of, hey, I'm going to hand down the work to you guys. And yeah, you've got a velocity and you say that's what you can achieve. But actually, I've seen your capacity. You're not at full capacity yet. So therefore, I'm not going to believe your velocity. And it's kind of some organizations, you can get them to understand it. Others look at it and say, well, that's the hours I'm paying for. what do we need to do to get you to that? What do we need to do to get the maximum capacity out of the team? Because they just can't get their head around velocity because they don't know what it is.
Right. So again, that's a lack of experience, isn't it, at the leadership level? But what a Scrum Master should do, being the custodian of the process, that's how they protect the team. And through education, if they can penetrate that level, then yes, education at that level. It's unlikely because organizations are all hierarchical. What they can do is set their own team up for success, right? By pushing back on the amount of work that is put into a sprint. So, for example, this is again why the product owner is motivated by delivery and the Scrum Master is motivated by the Scrum process. So those roles have natural tension, like I mentioned. And what a good Scrum Master will do is allow a certain amount for slack. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what that term means, it's actually an XP term. And it means basically not filling your entire capacity. So what Scrum Master should do is, if they know that the team constantly under deliver, as in they like overestimate their ability in a sprint, they constantly miss their sprint goals, what they need to be doing is sort of say, if they look at, you know, their average velocity being, say, 30 points, and the team are consistently adding 50, they need to put 25 points in next sprint. Say, well, that's all we're doing, guys. Because then they've got, you know, like 5-10 points slack, and even then that might not be enough. But the Scrum Master should say, you know, to the product owner, to the business, look, no good just doing this for the team because it's not making them deliver anymore. It's actually just putting more pressure on, and they're not developing at a sustainable pace, which will lead to burnout, which is no good for anybody. So as custodian of the Scrum process, this is what I want to do. And again, this is why I think a really good Scrum Master does have a long-term vision for the agility of a team. So I never start with sprint goals, because a sprint goal is totally pointless, excuse the pun, if a team can't estimate how many things that they can get through in a sprint, right?
Yeah.
So if they start off with how many points they can get through, right? Get that velocity stable. Then you can start sprint planning ahead of time with, you know, the product owner and the Scrum Master can work together, you know, or if there's a BA involved as well, they can work together, start planning future sprints based on current velocity, so that they get a better projection of when something's actually going to finish, like a feature is going to actually finish. And there's, you know, agile tools can do that, Jira Plan, etc. You can use Action of Agile, obviously, to help with your metrics and things. And I've not spoken much about metrics today, but obviously metrics are important, of course they are. But what's the most important thing to get a team going, if you're in an organization like that, where there's pressure on them to deliver more, get them to a position where their velocity is stable, and do that by making sure that the next sprint is successful by like literally putting hardly anything in. But again, using your own experience as a Scrum Master, like, I don't think this team's going to do any more than that. You just know, you just kind of know. So it's like, do that, get them to be successful in one sprint in terms of achieving what they set out to achieve. Don't put more into the sprint, protect them from all of that rubbish, you know, and then once they've got that stable velocity, then you can start looking forward to the next stage of agile maturity. And that means sprint goal estimation, that's epic estimation, and it's, you know, all that other stuff that comes into it, because the team are more agile is in their mindset as well.
Yeah, I think of my experience, the ones I've found the worst are regulated organizations. Like, I'm in financial services at the moment. So they have a real difficulty in actually getting a product owner, because we went through an agile transformation. They've got project managers. So instead of, you know, you push and you're saying, actually, what you need here is a product owner. You need one person who's going to make a decision.
Yeah.
But what they try to do is do it with a committee. So a committee is going through the work items and organising the backlog. But when you get to the point that you're having a daily stand up and saying, I need someone, the product owner at this meeting, because I want to know, look, we can do it type A or this way or that way. Which way do you want? They can't do it. They just can't do it because their view is, well, I'm a project manager. I've just said that I need it. I'm not going to go into the details. I can't answer that question.
Absolutely. So again, I mean, that's pure naivety from the organisation's perspective. How can you expect Scrum to be successful if you don't implement Scrum roles into the Scrum process?
Absolutely.
And it's like, it's this diffusion of responsibilities and, these hybrid roles that have come in, and then expecting them to deliver. When I talked about motivations earlier, if you replace the word motivation with ownership, and then you have the product owner, instead of saying motivated by delivery, like owns delivery, and the Scrum Master, instead of saying motivated by the Scrum process, owns the Scrum process. And the Scrum development team, instead of saying motivated by quality, owns the quality. If you think about it like that, it might actually help organizations to get into their heads what they're supposed to be doing, because you need a leader. People need leadership, right? And it's too much democracy in a Scrum team means that there's too much discussion about the process and not actually making any decisions about the process and just doing it, experiencing it, and then changing it, right? So that's what I'm talking about when a Scrum Master needs to be empowered to make decisions that they know is going to be successful for the team, because there's nothing more, painful than a Scrum Master who can see that a team is doing something terribly and doesn't want to change it, so empowering a Scrum Master to make those decisions as the custodian and owner of the Scrum process. Obviously, the team can inject if it's terrible, but it shouldn't be terrible if the Scrum Master's listening from experience.
And in fairness, in experience, the dev teams get it. It's not them that's the issue, and the Scrum Masters get it. It's the people outside the Scrum teams that actually really should be part of the team, the product owner and so on, who are kind of say, well, this Scrum process, that's a development thing, isn't it? We're kind of business people, and we really don't want to get in on that boat. We want you to do a flavour of Scrum.
Well,
the amount of times I've heard flavour of Scrum, or how can we make Scrum work for us?
Well, exactly, which is what I said at the very beginning of this talk, where organisations have tried to change Scrum to suit them because it's hard. It's just hard. It's too hard to do it properly. So I know, let's just change it. Let's make it easier. And that's not the point. And yes, the Scrum Guide doesn't mention this at all about how hard it actually is to do this and how much courage well, it does actually mention courage, but you are supposed to change for Scrum and not the other way round. And product owners who aren't doing the product owner role, they're doing this, they're doing that. Again, it's like that's not it's not working because people aren't doing Scrum properly as it was intended, right?
Yeah, and that's
We're going to have to stop here now.
Thank you,
guys.
Alex.
Running out. I see, Alex. Have you got a quick comment?
Just for Scott's question, really, and I'd say it's completely different. I'd say as Scrum Masters, you need to understand why, and that's an empirical approach. So you need to tell leaders about complexity and start talking about estimation and start talking about value. So talk about why we're delivering this and why. So I changed the conversation, personally, Scott. So that was what I was just.
I think that though, I agree with what you're saying, Alex. But I think in order to get to that point, the team need to get to that point by being able to do other stuff first. I think that's more towards their end point on their journey rather than being right at the beginning. And again, it's just my own view from personal experience. If you're able to bring a team to that position soon or sooner,
got about people outside the team asking about X, Y, Z, and I'd say if someone's coming to me about estimation, I'm talking about why you're asking us, where's the value, how are we going to measure it, what's the
Oh
impact.
yeah, 100%. And I don't think product owners think enough about the value that they're trying to
I
add.
wasn't Scrum, it wouldn't be a product owner, it'd be a Scrum Master for me to do that. It's like show point north, appears and value driven. So yeah, that would be.
Yeah, but I think part of the product owner role is to think about the return on investment, you know, so the product owner should be thinking about the product and what they want to deliver to the customer and what it's going to deliver to the customer and the value that's going to add and the money it's going to return versus how much it's going to cost to invest that. I think that is a product owner responsibility as well. And then they can bring it to life, not just for the team, but for the rest of the organization as well. They're the champions of adding the value and the outcomes, right?
I'd go back to the Scrum Guide and tell what's the purpose of Scrum Master. It's the effectiveness of the team, which includes product ownership, which is maximizing value. So yes, it might be product owner if they don't know it, but it might be the Scrum Master. Anyway,
I think Scrum Guide has changed a lot over the years. You know, I mean, I did my qualification, I think, in 2008. I think my Scrum Master qualification, based off probably the first version of the Scrum Guide, and I think
last one's 2022, but I do it for it. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll be frank. I'm a professional Scrum trainer.
We should probably to close here, but indeed, I think there's a good challenge here, I think, and it's worth for all of us to sort of think about that from both angles. Thank you for your patience. You've been here for a little bit longer than we would normally stay, but if I can just take a couple more minutes, if I may, just to wrap up. Quick announcements. Again, if you're here in the beginning, you've probably seen this, but we're looking to add a few members to our team. So if you do want to join us, then do send us an email and we'll get in touch with you and see what that could look like for you. Call for speakers. If there's anybody here who'd like to come and share their insights, bring in some experiences from the trenches, then please do so. We have both capacity for full talks like today's or lightning talks, which are much shorter, but also very potent and sharp. So do take advantage of these things. The next topic we have is on the planning fallacy and the optimism bias, which probably hooks into a lot of the things that Amy talked about today. So do join us on that. There's a QR code there, or you can visit Meetup as you would normally do to sign up. And finally, we have a YouTube channel. This recording will also go onto the channel. Do help us try and increase our subscription to 500. We're only sort of 7 or 8 away, and we're more than 8 here. So if we can achieve that today, that'd be fantastic. There's good resources there. Check it out. But other than that, a huge and final thank you to Amy, first and foremost, for taking your time today from Lake District to do all this amazing conversation with us. And for those of you that attended today and stayed all the way to the end, thank you so much. And for, of course, those of you that had some good insights, questions, and challenges to the conversation that just added to the very much to the topic of today's conversation. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you guys all in a month's time. God bless and take care.
Thanks, everybody.